In the dusty archives of the small church of San Bartolo in southern Italy, there lies a worn diary that the locals prefer not to mention. The pages of this diary, discovered by chance during the church's renovation in 1937, reveal a story many would rather forget. As restorers dismantled the old pulpit, they discovered a hiding place containing the personal diary of Father Bianchi, a priest who mysteriously vanished in the winter of 1913. What was written on these yellowed pages sheds light on one of the most sinister series of events in the region's history. This channel isn't for everyone, but if you're brave enough, we'll travel back in time to the distant year of 1912, when a series of inexplicable tragedies struck an isolated Italian village, claiming the lives of 9 men and leaving behind 9 widows, all of whom shared the surname Ricci. San Bartolo in the early 20th century was quite different from what we see today. Now, it's a bustling tourist town with cozy restaurants and renovated villas. But back then, it was an isolated rural community surrounded by steep mountains and impenetrable forests. The only road connecting the village to the nearest town often became impassable in the winter months, when snow and landslides cut San Bartolo off from the rest of the world. During these periods, the villagers could only rely on themselves, their supplies, and the centuries-old traditions of mutual aid. At the heart of village life stood the old stone church, built in the 15th century. Its bell tower rose above the rooftops, and its heavy bell marked the rhythm of village life, summoning parishioners to Mass and announcing births, weddings, and deaths. The church's priest, Father Bianchi, arrived in San Bartolo in 1905, a young and energetic clergyman determined to improve the lives of his flock. Out of curiosity, from what region are you listening to this story? Among the families of San Bartolo, the Ricci clan stood out. It wasn't just a family, but a true dynasty, owning most of the fertile land around the village, the olive groves on the southern slopes, and even a small olive oil factory. The dynasty's founder was old Giuseppe Ricci, who, by 1912, was already very old, but still held the reins of the family business in his wrinkled hands. Giuseppe had 5 daughters and 4 sons. All were married, and the Ricci family tree grew with each passing year. Life in San Bartolo flowed steadily and predictably until the spring of 1912. The winter had been harsh, food supplies were dwindling, and many families eagerly awaited the first harvest. It was then that the first misfortune struck. Marco Ferrari, the husband of Giuseppe's eldest daughter, Isabella Ricci, was found dead in his wine cellar. The official version was that he had fallen from the stairs, hit his head on the stone floor, and died instantly. Isabella was inconsolable, and the entire village gathered to support her in her grief. Father Bianchi conducted a modest but touching funeral ceremony. In his diary, he wrote on March 12, 1912, "Today, we laid Marco Ferrari to rest. His wife, Isabella, seems utterly heartbroken. Oddly, old Giuseppe seems more irritated than saddened. When I expressed my condolences, he merely muttered something about his son-in-law's clumsiness. I also noticed that Maria, Isabella's younger sister, stayed close to Antonio Rossi, the husband of her cousin Lucia. Their glances suggested more than just familial affection." Less than a month after Marco's funeral, the village was rocked by another misfortune. Antonio Rossi, Lucia Ricci's husband and Isabella's cousin's husband, was found in the olive grove with his throat slashed. The official explanation was that he had slipped and fallen on his own knife while pruning olive branches. The accident seemed strange but possible, considering the steep slopes and sharp tools used in the work. Father Bianchi again conducted the funeral service and wrote in his diary, April 17, 1912, "Another tragedy in the Ricci family. Antonio Rossi has died under strange circumstances. Lucia seems shocked, but not in the way one would expect from a woman who has lost her husband. Her eyes are dry, and her face shows more relief than grief. After the service, I accidentally overheard a conversation between her and Maria. They were talking about some money and how things would be easier now. When they noticed me, the conversation abruptly ended. Before we continue this disturbing tale, leave a comment with your theory about what was happening in the Ricci family. Your guesses might be closer to the truth than you think." May of 1912 brought not only flowers and warm weather to San Bartolo, but also a new tragedy. Francesco Bianchi, the husband of Anna Ricci, Giuseppe's youngest daughter, was found drowned in the river. According to eyewitness accounts, he had gone fishing early in the morning and probably slipped on the whetstones. His body was only found 2 days later when it snagged on the roots of a tree downstream. This time, Father Bianchi began to ask questions. In his diary, he wrote, May 10, 1912, the third death in the Ricci family in less than 3 months. This cannot be a coincidence. Francesco was a strong swimmer who grew up on the banks of this river. It's hard to believe he simply drowned. After the funeral, I tried to talk to Anna, but she was surrounded by her sisters and mother, who didn't leave her side. I noticed that Giuseppe looked strangely pleased for a man who had lost his third son-in-law. By June of 1912, rumors began to circulate in the village. People whispered about a curse that had fallen upon the men who married women from the Ricci family. But the reality turned out to be far more sinister than any supernatural curse. The fourth victim was Paolo Marini, the husband of Sofia Ricci, Giuseppe's second daughter. He was found in his own bed on the morning of June 28th. According to the official version, he died of a heart attack in his sleep. No one was surprised when Dr. Lorenzo Ricci, Sofia's cousin and the only doctor in the village, confirmed this cause of death. Sofia seemed heartbroken, but Father Bianchi noticed that her grief seemed staged. June 29th, 1912, the priest wrote in his diary, Paolo Marini passed away last night, the fourth husband in the Ricci family in 4 months. I'm beginning to seriously fear that something is amiss here. After the funeral, I went to Sofia's house under the guise of a pastoral visit and noticed a small, unlabeled bottle in her closet. When I asked about it, she paled and said it was medicine for insomnia prescribed by her cousin Lorenzo. But her hands were trembling, and she hastily hid the bottle. The fifth death occurred in July when Giovanni Esposito, Rosa Ricci's husband, was found in his vineyard with a fractured skull. The official version was that a heavy branch had fallen on him during a severe thunderstorm. But Father Bianchi noted in his diary that the sky had been clear that day, and the storm only started in the evening, after Giovanni's body had already been discovered. July 23, 1912, Giovanni Esposito became the fifth victim. I can no longer remain silent. Today, after the funeral, I tried to talk to the local police chief, Sergio Conti, but he just laughed at my suspicions. Father Bianchi, he said, you're reading too many detective novels. This is just an unfortunate coincidence. When I insisted, he reminded me that the Ricci family donates significant sums to the upkeep of the police station. It seems that justice in San Bartolo has its price. August brought the sixth tragedy. Enrico Romano, Clara Ricci's husband, fell from his horse during a ride and broke his neck. There were no witnesses to the incident, and the body was only found several hours later. Clara, upon receiving the news of her husband's death, displayed a restraint bordering on indifference. August 12, 1912, Father Bianchi wrote, Enrico Romano became the sixth husband to depart this world. I noticed something interesting at the funeral. All the widows had new, expensive rings on their fingers. When I asked Clara about her new ruby ring, she said it was a gift from her father as consolation. But I saw the exact same rings on the hands of Isabella, Lucia, Anna, Sophia, and Rosa. This is no longer a coincidence. It's a pattern. The seventh death occurred in September. Luca Ferretti, Giulia Ricci's husband, was found poisoned by mushrooms. According to the official version, he had picked and prepared the mushrooms himself, mistaking edible species for poisonous ones. But Father Bianchi knew that Luca was an experienced mushroom hunter who had learned to distinguish between mushrooms from childhood and would never have made such a mistake. September 18, 1912, Luca Ferretti became the seventh victim. After the funeral, I decided to conduct my own investigation. Under the pretext of a condolence visit, I went to Giulia's house, and while she was preparing coffee, I quickly searched the kitchen. In the far corner of a cabinet, I found a small bag of dried mushrooms, clearly poisonous. When Giulia returned and saw me with the bag, she paled and said they were medicinal herbs collected by her mother. but I know the local plants well and can distinguish medicinal herbs from deadly mushrooms. October brought the eighth tragedy. Alberto Conti, Beatrice Ricci's husband, was found frozen to death in the mountains. According to the official version, he had gone hunting and, lost in a suddenly descending fog, froze to death at night when the temperature dropped sharply below zero. But Father Bianchi knew that Alberto was an experienced hunter and knew the local mountains well. October 25, 1912, the priest recorded, Alberto Conti became the eighth victim. This time, I decided to act more decisively. After the funeral, I went to old Giuseppe Ricci's house under the pretext of discussing donations to the church. In his office, while he briefly left the room, I quickly looked through the papers on his desk and found several insurance policies. It turns out that all the husbands of Giuseppe's daughters and daughters-in-law were insured for large sums, and the payouts were to be made in the event of their deaths. The beneficiaries listed were their wives, and in the event of the wives' deaths, Giuseppe himself. Now the picture is becoming clearer. The ninth and final death occurred in November of 1912. David Merelli, Eleonora Ricci's husband and Giuseppe's niece, supposedly accidentally shot himself in the head while cleaning his hunting rifle. No one in the village believed this version, but no one dared to publicly express doubts. November 15, 1912, Father Bianchi wrote, David Merelli became the ninth and, I hope, final victim. I can no longer stand aside. Today, after the funeral, I directly asked Eleonora, how could it be that an experienced hunter like her husband made such a fatal mistake while cleaning his rifle? She burst into tears and ran away, and her mother, Vittoria Ricci, Giuseppe's sister, approached me and quietly said, Father Bianchi, you're asking too many questions in our village. It could be hazardous to your health. It was a clear threat, but I cannot back down when 9 lives have been lost. In December of 1912, Father Bianchi began collecting evidence. He secretly met with a pharmacist from a neighboring town, who confirmed that he had received unusually many orders for potent poisons from Dr. Lorenzo Ricci throughout the year. The pharmacist showed the priest records according to which Dr. Ricci had ordered arsenic, cyanide, and several rare herbal poisons, supposedly for scientific research. December 10, 1912, Father Bianchi wrote, Today, I received confirmation of my suspicions. The Ricci family is systematically eliminating the husbands of their daughters and daughters-in-law to collect insurance payouts. Dr. Lorenzo Ricci, who signed all the death certificates, is a key figure in this conspiracy. But I still don't understand why they decided to kill all the sons-in-law within a single year. Why such a rush? Perhaps the answer lies in the family's financial situation. Father Bianchi decided to test this theory and turned to his old friend, a banker from Naples. In a letter dated December 15, 1912, the banker reported that the Ricci Olive Oil Company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Several years of poor harvests, competition from more modern productions, and old Giuseppe's unsuccessful investments had put the family business in dire straits. The banker also mentioned that at the beginning of 1912, Giuseppe Ricci had taken out a huge loan, secured by all his land, and the repayment deadline was approaching in January of 1913. December 20th, 1912, the priest recorded, Now everything has fallen into place. Giuseppe Ricci needed money to save the family business and decided to get it in the most terrible way, at the cost of his sons-in-law's lives. The insurance payouts received by his daughters and daughters-in-law were supposed to go towards paying off the loan and restoring the company. But how did he convince his daughters and daughters-in-law to participate in this terrible plan? Can family loyalty really go that far? In the last days of December, Father Bianchi decided to act. He wrote a detailed letter outlining all his suspicions and evidence and sent it to the prosecutor in Naples. He hid a copy of the letter in a hiding place under the pulpit in the church, along with his diary and copies of all the evidence he had collected. December 31st, 1912, reads the last entry in Father Bianchi's diary. Today, I sent the letter to the prosecutor. I know that I'm risking my life, but I cannot remain silent when 9 people have died, and their killers remain unpunished. If something happens to me, let this diary be my testimony. Giuseppe Ricci has invited me to a New Year's Eve dinner tomorrow. I must go so as not to arouse suspicion, but I will be extremely careful. God, give me strength and protection in this trial. The diary entries end there. Father Bianchi disappeared in the first days of January 1913. The official version was that he had gone on a pilgrimage to Rome and had not returned, but his belongings remained in the church house and his horse in the stable. No one saw him leave San Bartolo, and no news of him was ever received. Out of curiosity, what happened to the priest? Leave a comment with your version of events. Meanwhile, Father Bianchi's letter did reach the prosecutor in Naples. In mid-January of 1913, a group of investigators led by a young and ambitious inspector, Vittorio Manzoni, arrived in San Bartolo. The locals greeted the investigators warily, and the Ricci family with open hostility. Inspector Manzoni began his investigation by searching for Father Bianchi. He thoroughly examined the church house and the church itself, but found no traces of struggle or violence. Then he turned his attention to the small cemetery behind the church. Among the recent graves was one unnamed, with a simple wooden cross. When Manzoni ordered the body exhumed, it was discovered that the grave contained a man in priestly clothing with signs of violent death, a deep wound on the back of his head. The medical examination confirmed that it was Father Bianchi's body and that he had died from a heavy blow to the head with a blunt object. Judging by the state of the body, the murder had occurred in early January, shortly after his disappearance. Inspector Manzoni conducted a series of interrogations. First, he spoke with the locals, most of whom refused to say anything, fearing the wrath of the Ricci family. But there were also those who, despite their fear, dared to break the silence. Old Maria Conti, a maid in Giuseppe Ricci's house, said that on the night before Father Bianchi's disappearance, a large family dinner had taken place at her master's house, to which the priest had also been invited. "I was serving the table," she said, "and I saw the master pouring wine into the priest's glass from a special bottle. After dinner, Father Bianchi looked strange, as if he were drunk or poisoned. Giuseppe ordered his sons, Marco and Paolo, to escort the priest home. I never saw him again." Salvatore Esposito, a blacksmith whose forge was next to the church, reported that he had seen Marco and Paolo Ricci leading a staggering Father Bianchi under the arms late in the evening. "They weren't heading towards the church house," the blacksmith recalled, "but towards the old well behind the church. I didn't think much of it, assuming that the priest had simply had too much wine at dinner. But now that you ask, it seems suspicious." Inspector Manzoni ordered the old well to be inspected. When the water was pumped out, a heavy iron cross was found at the bottom, with traces of blood and hair matching Father Bianchi. It was the murder weapon. With this evidence, Manzoni went to Giuseppe Ricci's house. The old man greeted him with feigned cordiality, but fear could be seen in his eyes. When the inspector presented him with the evidence he had found, Giuseppe tried to deny everything, but his confidence gradually waned. The decisive moment came when Manzoni showed Giuseppe a copy of Father Bianchi's letter sent to the prosecutor, and pages from his diary found in the hiding place under the pulpit in the church. The old Ricci paled and fell into his chair, refusing to comment further without the presence of a lawyer, but it was already too late. Inspector Manzoni obtained warrants for the arrest of all members of the Ricci family who had participated in the conspiracy. Giuseppe Ricci, his sons Marco and Paolo, Dr. Lorenzo Ricci, and all 9 widows were arrested and taken to Naples for further investigation and trial. During the investigation, shocking details emerged. It turned out that the plan to murder the sons-in-law had been developed by Giuseppe Ricci at the end of 1911, when it became clear that his business was on the verge of collapse. He gathered a family council at which he convinced his daughters and daughters-in-law that the only way to save the family fortune was to collect the insurance payouts after their husbands' deaths. Giuseppe's daughters and daughters-in-law, raised in an atmosphere of absolute devotion to the family, agreed to participate in this terrible plan. Each of them was to arrange an accident for her husband throughout 1912. Dr. Lorenzo Ricci provided medical cover, signing false death certificates and providing poisons for cases where a more subtle solution was needed. During the trial, which began in March of 1913 in Naples, All the evidence collected by Inspector Manzoni was presented. Father Bianchi's diary, the pharmacist's records, eyewitness testimony, insurance policies, and bank documents showing how the money from the insurance payouts was transferred to the Ricci company's accounts. The defense tried to challenge the evidence, claiming that the priest's diary was merely the product of his diseased imagination and that all the deaths were indeed accidental. But when the prosecutor called Maria, Giuseppe's youngest daughter, to the witness stand, something unexpected happened. Maria, the youngest of the sisters, could not withstand the pressure and confessed everything. She recounted how her father had organized the conspiracy, how each of the sisters and daughters-in-law had received instructions on how to eliminate her husband, and how Dr. Lorenzo had helped conceal the true causes of death. She also confirmed that Marco and Paolo Ricci had killed Father Bianchi on their father's orders when they learned that the priest had sent a letter to the prosecutor. Maria's confession was a turning point in the trial. One by one, the defendants began to testify, trying to shift the blame onto each other. Giuseppe Ricci claimed that he had merely suggested the idea but had not forced anyone to participate in its implementation. The daughters and daughters-in-law accused old Giuseppe of psychological pressure and manipulation. Dr. Lorenzo claimed that he had acted under threat of physical violence. The trial lasted 3 months and became a sensation in Italy. Newspapers across the country published detailed reports on the progress of the trial, calling it the case of the 9 widows or the Ricci family conspiracy. The public was shocked by the scale and cold-bloodedness of the crime. In June of 1913, the court delivered its verdict. Giuseppe Ricci, recognized as the organizer of the conspiracy, was sentenced to life imprisonment. His sons, Marco and Paolo, received 30 years in prison each for participating in the conspiracy and the murder of Father Bianchi. Dr. Lorenzo Ricci was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The fate of the 9 widows caused the greatest debate. The defense argued that they had acted under the influence of patriarchal pressure, having been raised in traditions of unconditional obedience to the head of the family. The prosecution insisted that, regardless of their upbringing, the murder of their husbands was their conscious choice. In the end, the widows received varying sentences depending on the degree of their participation and the brutality of the crimes committed. Isabella, Sophia, and Eleonora, whose methods were deemed the most cruel, received 20 years each. The remaining widows were sentenced to terms ranging from 10 to 15 years. Only Maria, whose confession had helped the investigation, received a lighter sentence: 5 years probation. After the verdict was announced, Giuseppe Ricci said, "I acted for the good of the family. Everything I did was to preserve our name and our heritage." To which the judge replied, "You have destroyed 9 lives and disgraced your name forever. Your legacy is now shame and crime." Giuseppe Ricci did not live long in prison. He passed away 3 months after the start of his imprisonment, in September of 1913. According to the official conclusion, the cause of death was heart failure, but there were rumors that the old man had refused food and died of starvation. Marco and Paolo Ricci served their full terms and were only released in 1943, in the midst of World War II. They returned to San Bartolo, but the locals refused to take them back. The brothers had to move to northern Italy, where they lived under false names until the end of their days. Dr. Lorenzo Ricci died in the prison hospital in 1925 from tuberculosis. Before his death, he wrote a detailed confession in which he described his role in the conspiracy in detail and expressed deep remorse. The fates of the 9 widows varied. Some of them, after serving their sentences, tried to start new lives under other names. Others remained in prison until the end of their days, unable to come to terms with what they had done. Maria, who received a suspended sentence, left for America and never returned to Italy. The Ricci estate and all family assets were confiscated by the state. Part of the funds went to compensate the families of the deceased husbands, and part to restore the church in San Bartolo, where Father Bianchi was murdered. The Ricci family case became one of the most famous mass murder cases in the history of Italy in the early 20th century. It is studied by criminologists and psychologists as an example of how family loyalty and financial difficulties can lead to terrible crimes. In 1937, when restoration work was being carried out in the church of San Bartolo, workers discovered a hiding place under the pulpit. In it lay Father Bianchi's diary, copies of his letters to the prosecutor, and several of the priest's personal belongings. These documents confirmed the already known story and added several new details to the Ricci case. Today, a small museum in San Bartolo houses copies of these documents, as well as photographs of the members of the Ricci family and their victims. Tour guides tell visitors the story of the 9 widows and show the places where the tragic events of 1912 and 1913 took place. But the most interesting thing in this story is what might have happened if Father Bianchi had not uncovered the conspiracy. According to the documents found, Giuseppe Ricci's plan was not limited to eliminating his sons-in-law. Insurance policies were found in his papers on the lives of the daughters and daughters-in-law themselves, with himself listed as the recipient of the payouts. It is quite possible that after solving the financial problems with the help of the first series of murders, Giuseppe planned to get rid of his daughters as well to get even more money. This channel isn't for everyone, but if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new investigations of historical crimes. The story of the Ricci family reminds us that the most terrible crimes are often committed not by strangers, but by loved ones, those we trust most, and that even in the most isolated and closed communities, the truth eventually comes out. Father Bianchi, a simple country priest, gave his life for truth and justice. His courage and devotion to duty made it possible to uncover a terrible crime and punish the perpetrators. His diary, found decades later, became the voice of victims who could not speak for themselves. And what do you think about this story? From what state are you listening to this tale? Leave a comment with your thoughts and theories about what else might remain undiscovered in the Ricci family case. Thank you for spending this time with me, delving into the dark secrets of the past. See you soon in the world of historical investigations.